Welcome to Where Are They Now? I'm your host, Heather Lindstedt from the Chelmsford High class of 1985. Today, I am joined by Dan McGrath, the class of 2009. Dan, thank you so much for being here today.
Heather, thank you very much for having me.
Wow, you're an all-time lifer at Chelmsford, so it's going to be really fun to talk to you about the experience of going through Chelmsford High and then obviously coming full circle and back.
Absolutely.
So tell me about, you can talk about because you've been from Chelmsford, but middle school and those kinds of things. But your experience as you entered the high school and how you felt as a ninth grader, because you were following your brother and sister, correct?
Yep, my brother and sister, there's 2 years in between all of us. So my sister, when I was leaving 8th grade, was graduating the high school. So it was like this full circle thing. And my brother, was going to be a junior. So I remember being excited. I went to the Parker, and I think they do a really good job of, preparing you to enter that next phase of education. And I was very lucky, to have great friends that were coming up with me. And I think they do a great job at the high school, especially with the house system, of introducing you to the idea of what's next, right, and what to expect. So as a freshman, I was excited, and I was, a big adjustment with the schedule. We had block scheduling back then, so you go from having your set schedule every single class every single day and having these 98-minute long blocks, and which was cool. You feel like a little bit of an older student. And the other thing that was nice as entering as a freshman was, that I played football. So you kind of start with sports before school does a little bit. And you were able to meet some of those kids from the McCarthy. That was always a thing going to high school. Was, if you're from the McCarthy or the Parker, I only know half my class. I don't know, or I've heard of this kid, I don't know them. So having that opportunity, I think in the summer, in the fall, to sort of join together with all these people and have the opportunity to get to know each other, I think really helped with the transition. Because day one, school starts, and you're like, oh yeah, we've been hanging out for a month already. So yeah, that's sort of what I remember about starting high school, especially was the football practices and in the hot heat and kind of getting ready, but then feeling ready, once things started. But
it's still a small community. Everybody knows your name. So was there, anything from any teacher that was like, oh, you're another McGrath or?
Yes, I will say, so, it's funny too, because I think my brother and sister always wanted to know, were they calling you Maggie's brother or Michael's brother?
Okay,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
My sister was very talented. She was a really good musician, and she had been in, the musicals, and she was really so she had kind of left her mark by the time she left here, and had a really great reputation, and so did my brother. And I think one of the things that, people would always say, and to my brother and sister's credit, it's not a competition, obviously, but they were really nice. Do you know what I mean? I think that was sort of the reputation they had was, oh, they're such a pleasure. Oh, Michael, he's so nice. And so I think coming in, which has always been my MO as well, is to try to be kind and leave a good impression. But that was, I think, those are the shoes I was trying to fill for my siblings. Was I want to be if people think of me, I want them to think of me as kind as they are. And as welcoming, and that was that was my hope coming into the high school.
Now you're talking about being kind, but I'm a lot older than you. But was there still the rivalry though amongst the you brought up the houses? Right?
Oh yeah.
So you're trying to be kind, but were you still like yelling "Go Emerson" and all that stuff?
I think I've always tried to be like. Flip the switch, right? So it's like you can, be sensitive to limits, like the setting you're in. But when the time came, yeah, for sure, I've always been very competitive as well, and I think that comes out sometimes, and people are surprised to see it because I try to be very even-keeled and mild-mannered. But oh yeah, there's a competitive edge there as well.
Well, you played football,
right?
So
right.
And ran track or played track.
Yeah, ran that was like the 2 laps before practice started. We always used to joke because I threw shot put and discus that we'd say. We would only run if we were being chased, but that was our mantra. But yeah, so track, I stayed active, and I really started track just because at the end of freshman football, they said, you need to be doing something. Like, you need to stay busy, and Coach Russo at the time, who, kind of said, you'll throw a shot put. You're built like a shot putter, you'll throw a shot put. So after that, it was really something that, okay, the spring comes, and I say, well, I think I'll do spring track, and there's some different events, and for the rest of high school, I was a 3-season athlete. So I was, football, track, and that's kind of really where I spent a lot of my time after school was, competing and practicing. And but I think in terms of the competitive level and everything else, I was always, I was certainly talented, but I always was, I think, closer to average than being an all-star. And I think that was something that was actually helpful to me because it allowed me to relate to everybody on the team. I was definitely contributing, but I was also cheering on people as they were, winning and scoring and stuff. So I always felt really comfortable, I think, whenever setting I was in because I, had the ability to relate to whoever I was around. And I think that was something that was helpful for me. So, but yeah, track was a place where I was able to exercise both the athletic and competitive itch in me, and then also the highly social piece of me as well. Because track meets there's a lot of downtime, there's a lot of socializing, and you get to, whether it's you get your little inside jokes with friends, or you're messing around, or those are like those happy memories, right? And so, I remember there's an interview from a few years ago of this college athlete who's leaving, and they said, "What will you miss the most?" And he said, "I think lunch," which was, his time to socialize with his teammates. And those, when you have those team building, it was not the expected answer, but I very much identify with that kind of an answer. It was like, it's those in-between moments. It's in between the whistles, in between the drills, in between everything else where you just get to be with your friends,
But a completely different atmosphere from a football practice, though, to a track.
Very much, yes.
I mean, you're still trying to accomplish, right?
Yes.
But with football, it's more about the score on the board.
There's a one collective goal, right? You
Yeah.
look up at the scoreboard, and that's representative of the entire team, right? So, and as you know, there's it's just that one game a week. It's you prepare all week for a single opponent, and that's definitely the mindset for football. Where track, whatever event you're in, is you are absolutely looking to score team points. There's a team goal there as well, but you're really competing with yourself. You're competing about what's my personal best going to be, and then also in those dual meets saying, all right, how far do they throw? I need to throw just 1 inch farther, and so the preparation is very different, mindset's very different, but ultimately, yeah, but I still think the takeaway from both when I look back is those friendships. And, you remember your records and everything like that, but you also remember, oh, well, I remember we used to laugh a lot when this would happen. Or, when it was this time of practice, we would laugh a lot. And I think that was what I enjoyed most, was just that socialization piece.
So the socialization in the classroom, like who were your inspirations as teachers and those kind of things that keep you focused on you're doing sports and those kind of things, but that your academics had to be where they're at?
I think, one of the strengths of Chelmsford High School really are the teachers. And, you see that too with how little turnover there is. There's people who are there for so long. I was always pretty innately motivated as a student. I wanted to do well for myself, but there were teachers you also wanted to do very well for. I think, I was very lucky with my freshman teachers. I was always more of a social studies English kind of person, so I was very much more drawn to the humanities. Had great math and science teachers, but it was never my primary interest. So I had great teachers like, Katie Sullivan. I had Miss Sullivan my freshman year for world history, and she was right up my alley. She was very funny, she was hilarious, and she was very passionate about what she was teaching. But she'd kind of give you that, if it wasn't always her best, it was like, come on, do you know what I mean? Like, you can do better than that, or she was so supportive because she believed in you. And I think that helped me going into my sophomore year when I had Mr. Lemire. Bob Lemire, who was, probably one of the all-time great teachers in that building. But that was the first time I didn't feel like a kid in a class. I felt like, oh, I'm a student. Do you know what I mean? I'm here to learn, and he taught it like a college class. It was lecture-based. We didn't open the book that much. It was all from, he has forgotten more in his lifetime than some people will ever know. But that was I remember, when you get a paper back and there was an A on it or an A- or whatever it was, you were like, oh, he thinks I'm a good writer. Do you know what I mean? Or like he's given me, and so those are things you wanted to do well for those teachers. And I think too, the environment that was great about when I went to school was, again, we had those longer blocks, and I think there's arguments to be made for any type of schedule, but there was more time, I think, to kind of shoot the breeze a little bit in the beginning of class, right? You have 98 minutes. There's plenty of time to focus on content, but making those connections with the adults in your life was really great. And whether it was them telling a story about a former student they had, or just something that happened on their weekend, or kind of soft launching to what the content was going to be that day. That's the stuff I really liked, and being able to go back and forth, right? So like I had a teacher that told me when I was in 8th grade that you're funny in class, but you're sensitive to limits, right? So I always tried to get everybody involved, make it maybe get the teacher off track sometimes a little bit, but I never pushed it, and I think teachers appreciated that as well, because you're able to have this light atmosphere that people are comfortable in, and when people are comfortable, again, whether it's on the sports field or in the classroom, I think that's when they're most able to learn, right? They don't feel intimidated asking a question, or hey, can you repeat that, or I actually don't understand. And so that's what I really liked about my time at Chelmsford High School, is just being able to establish that dynamic early on, and then be like, okay, yeah, I'm ready to learn now. So yeah, I was very lucky.
So moving on to college and off to Holy Cross,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, Holy Cross.
I didn't say it right. I mean?
No, it's Holy Cross. Yeah, College of the Holy Cross, but it's known as Holy Cross.
Okay.
The Cross, yeah.
So what was that transition like, though? I mean, did you feel like very comfortable in the movement? I mean, it's not a huge school,
Right. There was the transition was interesting, because it was certainly more intense, the environment, than high school, where you're like, I know these people for 10 years, and these are my friends, and whatever. Holy Cross is a rigorous academic school. It's an awesome school. I think one thing, even as academics aside, one thing that I think helped my transition to Holy Cross was a school I decided to go to largely based on a value system, right? I think it's such an important piece now. And in my current work as a school counselor, when we look at college counseling, you want to find a school that aligns with your values. And I think Holy Cross, as a Jesuit school, they're really into the mission of men and women for others, and social justice. And I think that at the high school here, between the amount of extracurricular and volunteer opportunities I was able to in leadership too, that piece I was so prepared for, in the sense that I'm ready to do things, I'm ready to be involved in my community, I'm ready to consider this place, and not just Holy Cross, but Worcester in general, as a place of home. These are people I'm going to invest in and care about, because that was very much imparted to me as a high school student, was that you need to really invest in the people around you, and you do that by getting involved, right? So it's one thing to say hi to your neighbor. It's another thing to say, how do I make this experience for people better? So that was something that was like right on for me when I got to Holy Cross. I was like, oh yeah, this is great, because that's what they're all about. Academically, I think any student in their first semester gets rocked a little bit with the amount of work they have. I always joke, and this is not a knock at my preparation, because I was so ready for it, but I did more writing, I think, in my first semester of college than I did in like my entire high school career. But I had really great skills, and I think that when you're at a school like that, it can be intimidating. You're around a lot of really smart people, a lot of people who went to prestigious private schools, and but I think the thing that was funny for me was I had all these kids that went to private school. My roommate used to jokingly call me a public school degenerate, but I think they were like, oh, how, like, all this stuff? I'm like, you went to public school? I'm like, yes, I went to a very good public school. You know what I mean? This is why public school is important and investing in education is. But yeah, I felt just as prepared as those students. But also, like Chelmsford High School, one thing that Holy Cross, I always felt supported. And I think the other thing that Chelmsford helped me do was know how to access resources, know how to ask for help, and not feel silly doing so. So I think that was something, I have a lot of lion's pride. I didn't have too much personal pride, in terms of asking, I'm kind of lost, or I'm having trouble, or, this is, what can I do to make this easier for myself? Because I did struggle at times in college. It was, the time management piece was very difficult. Not having, it's 10:30 a.m. and I'm done with my classes, now what, so, but yeah, I think that even when you feel a little lost academically or lost, whatever, if you still can maintain and be in touch with your virtues and your values, I think you're able to get through it, right? And so I think, and that was the thing that Holy Cross really provided me with, was continued opportunities for engagement in the community, leadership, and just, I feel like I learned a tremendous amount based on my education there.
So when did you think about counseling, and because obviously then you went into getting your master's?
Yeah.
And Worcester must have been important to you, because you stayed there.
That's spot on. And Assumption at the time was one of the few fully in-person cohort programs, but I really felt I loved the idea of getting back in Worcester and having that ability to, it was a familiar community. A lot of the case study you're doing is Worcester School District, and that was something that was familiar to me. I was a political science major in college, and I had a concentration in peace and conflict studies, which is an interdisciplinary minor essentially. And when I started college, I essentially thought I wanted to go into law school. I think that's what a lot of political science majors think. Yep. And it's actually someone with Chelmsford ties. I had a professor, Lauren Cass, who has his children went through the Chelmsford school system, and he said, what do you want to do when you get out? And I said, I think I want to go to law school. Maybe he goes, I don't think you want to go to law school. I don't know if you remember the conversation exactly the same way, but I was like, what do you mean? And I just think it was. There were so many other opportunities to help people that you didn't have to follow this strict path of going to law school and poring over material and everything. And education was always important to me. I still didn't know what I wanted to do when I graduated. I was very aimless. I'd actually taken some time off. My father ended up passing away when I was in college, and so I took time off to kind of take care of my mental health and kind of feel like I wanted to be successful while I was in college. So I took time off and I went back and finished, and it was not the path I thought I was on, and I graduated and I didn't know what I wanted to do. But I actually was very lucky in the sense that from the time I was at 16 years old, I worked at Hannaford in Chelmsford, so a local supermarket. And for a lot of people, they see those types of jobs as first job. You get some skills, you move on. For me, it was a place I always felt I was my best self. I'm working with people. I'm working with all different types of people. Learning skills. You're learning a lot about business. The difference between wholesale, retail. How do we order? What's the projections like? So, I started as a bagger, and by the time I left, I was an assistant department manager. Overseeing this very big department. The Chelmsford store is one of the highest volume stores in Massachusetts. So, I was able to kind of go back there and say, I think maybe I want to go into management. Kind of was being trained for a year before I decided I really actually think my calling might be education. And the reality is there's so many transferable skills when you look at sort of management and any type of educational position. And that I was doing a lot of training. That was one of my favorite things to do was training. New associates, and a new associate could be 16 or they could be 60 in retirement. You know what I mean? So you have to learn how to communicate to different types of people, and you have to meet people where they're at, which is the cornerstone of counseling. And so, so you're coaching people, you're training people. Maybe somebody walks in and they don't look like they're having a great day. Pull them in the office, hey, what's going on? I just want to check in before your shift starts. How are you? Do you know what I mean? And so. And in just the constant changing of demands, every day was different at that supermarket. So I think there were so many transferable skills in even multiculturally. I mean, it's really just the ability to understand and connect with different types of people. But yeah, so I so appreciate the time I spent there because I really do feel it prepared me for education. So by the time I got into classrooms and I decided, okay, I think I would like to do this, and I started my master's program. At the time, I was working full-time as a paraprofessional at Tewksbury High School because I felt it was very important to get classroom experience before I was going to go into counseling. I think it's really important, especially where you're trying to see how does a kid present across settings, right? Because some people are so great one-on-one, and then you get them in a group, and it's different, right? And it could be good or bad or anything in between. And so you get a whole new appreciation for that, and finished my master's, and I was hired at Dartmouth High School down the South Coast and worked there for several years.
But why counseling and not into the education?
That's a great question. I think it's a great question. I've always, growing up, I think you were always looking for your thing. You say, what's my skill? So you talk about the competitive stuff with my siblings earlier. I will say it was never as much of a competition as it was a silent, oh, they're good at things and I don't know that I'm good at things. Like my sister was really talented at singing and she's a really great musician, and my brother was a really good athlete. He was really good, played varsity lacrosse, and he could swim, he could play back, he could dunk, he was a high jumper, he kind of did it all. And I was like, I don't know that I have a thing. Like I don't really, like people like me and I'm nice and I have friends and stuff, but I don't really know what my thing is. And but I was always a good listener. I was always I really am interested in people, and I think that teaching is certainly was what I considered second. So it wasn't like I was far off from teaching, but I think with counseling, again, I think something like I've said, the same, like the most effective adults I had in my life when I was young were people who really, they lacked pretense, and they felt like they really created a quick, comfortable environment. And I'd been on the other end of the spectrum, knowing what it was like to struggle as well and need help, and also being able to provide it. And so I liked the idea of counseling. I liked, and that was in school counseling specifically, you get to do a little bit of everything. And I think that that was something that was appealing to me, that was, well, the day is structured similarly. There's no 2 days alike. So there's no part of the year where I'm like, oh, we're in this part of the curriculum again, and that can get a little redundant. And some people thrive off that continuity. And for me, I like not really knowing what's going to happen that day.
Who's going to walk into Emerson House?
Yes.
So you got to. Did you pick Emerson, or they just picked
No,
you
it was
for
serendipitous, I suppose. So
Yeah.
I was down in Dartmouth, which again, I can't say enough about my time there. It was great, but it wasn't home. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I wanted to get back up in the Merrimack Valley, and would have happily, worked anywhere around here. It was just the timing was good for me in terms of the spot opening up at the high school, and it happened to be an Emerson House,
Yeah.
and so it was funny at first going back there because. It's kind of how you remember it, but a little bit different. It's like a time warp. So, but yeah, it was nice being back in Emerson. And when I was there, we were lucky to have such great administration, such strong culture. It was I had Dean Doherty and Dean Battle and Dean O'Brien and Principal Thomas and people that had worked together for a long time. Chelmsford people,
Yep.
people. So there was really. I really liked going back because you're with different people who maybe are from different towns or different districts, and it was nice to be like, oh yeah, no, this is my house that I was in, and I always tell kids so the way we do the freshman house meetings at the beginning of the year, and Principal Murray tells them how important it is to get involved and everything, but we always say, hey, like when you graduate, people are going to say, where are you from? And you're going to say, I'm from Chelmsford. And they're going to say, oh, you're from Chelmsford. What year did you graduate? What house were you in? Like these are questions people ask, and I think that I'm like in terms of their identity and shared culture, it's a cool thing, and it is funny for me to be able to go back and say, oh, I was in Emerson, and even now the different things I'm involved in, I'll still see Dean Doherty or Principal Thomas, and it's full circle in that regard.
Well, I was Emerson, Mr. Quinn, though. Are there teachers there, though? Do you have a hard time with the Mr. or Mrs. or any teachers, former teachers? Because there's certain people that I still see it, like Mr. Doherty.
Yes.
Or Coach Doherty, and I can't call him, I don't even know.
Yeah, I think I just started calling Principal Thomas Al.
I don't think I can call him Jeff.
Right,
That is
right.
his name.
It's interesting. There are certain teachers, and they'll tell you, just call me this, just tell me
Yep.
that. The one teacher I still, for some reason, I can't get past is Mr. Green, one of our history teachers. For me, he's just Mr. Green. I don't feel natural calling him Jeremy for whatever reason. And his class was one I had as a senior that was so fun. And I felt he was ahead of his time in a lot of the assignments we had. I graduated in 2009, and he had us doing this world leader Twitter assignment. He goes, I think in the future, world leaders are going to probably use Twitter a lot more. And we're like, that's kind of silly. This is for, like celebrities and memes and stuff like that. And lo and behold, it's the primary source of communication now. And he would do all these fun things, but he's one that I'm still like, no, you're Mr. Green. And if I say, oh, Mr. Green, I'll say it jokingly, but I really mean it, so.
So, but your give back and your teaching comes with being the assistant track coach.
Yes, so that was, yeah.
So you might not be in a classroom, but pretty much you're teaching.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that's why it's such an outlet for me that I enjoy is coaching is teaching. It really is teaching. And again, you have to establish a comfortable environment. You have to have a group culture, group norms, all these things that are really vital to a successful classroom and classroom management. And so I was very fortunate, again, just timing. I got really lucky when I started in Chelmsford. They needed a throws coach, and they knew I had a background of, in throwing. And I almost was like, oh, I don't want to say yes too quick because I don't want to seem too excited. But I was really excited. And it's a great group of coaches, but yeah, it really is rewarding to me because again, like I said, I was an athlete. I was not an all-star. I was not, there were not many write-ups on me in the paper or anything like that. But I was good. It was good, and I was always coachable, and I cared about my technique. I cared about what we were doing. Again, having pride in yourself, and but I think because of that, I really relate to those who are still learning and that are still trying to get better, and. So yeah, coaching is great. Again, when we talk about, kids present differently across settings, my day as a counselor can be kind of heavy sometimes, or it can be a long day, different issues you're trying to, resolve or fires you're trying to put out. And it's kind of nice at the end of the day to just know, all right, well at 2:30 or whatever, I'm going to be able to go to track. It's a totally different environment, totally different. There might not, you might still be putting fires out and solving issues, but it's different. And I find that really rewarding. So that's, I think, where I scratch my itch to teach a little bit is through coaching.
Right.
Yeah.
But don't you think, though, that you started as a thrower,
Yep.
right? But you knew nothing about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so I think that most people will talk about, and you kind of not giving yourself much credit, even if you weren't good, that you're a listener.
Oh, for sure.
And you learned how to throw because you were a great listener, though, too.
Yeah, and
right?
I would give Rob Russo a lot of credit for that
Yeah.
as well. So Rob, he's one that he was Russo, for Mr. Russo for a very long time, but he was really good at teaching, and he was very good at explaining the science behind things and the why behind things, and he wasn't just do it, right? It wasn't just one of those things. It was like if you had questions, he would answer them, and he was a big inspiration to me in terms of he provided me with a lot of leadership opportunities, so whether it was, telling me, no, I think you'll enjoy track, or, recruiting me for something else after school. And I try to emulate the best of all the different coaches I had, right? And so, but absolutely, I think that, and I think much like football as well, throwing is a lot more technical than people realize it is. Right. So there is a lot to learn, and we do, these sort of station rotation clinics at the beginning of each season for kids to try them out, and I always love to see some of our really talented athletes who think it's going to be easy, and they're like, oh, actually, I can't do this at all. So they get humbled a little bit, which is always fun. But yeah, I think that is a learning community. I mean, you're constantly learning, you're constantly striving for self-improvement, and I think, especially with track and field, it's very objective. I mean, your scores are your scores, your times are your times, your distances are your distances, where, you can go play a game of basketball or football and say, well, it felt okay, or it felt different, whereas this is very, your marks are your marks. So, but yeah, it's a very big learning community. And it requires listening for sure, and feedback. So listening and inputting feedback as well, which is a very important skill to both be able to give and receive. So
is it hard, though, being their counselor, though, and then also being a coach?
No, I think that's a great question, but I think that I try to stay right. I try to stay very, being fair and consistent. And I also think I think the kids know that I'm not Mr. McGrath. I think there's a difference between Mr. McGrath and Coach McGrath, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? So you have to. It's a different environment, and you might speak a little differently. You might sort of, be a little bit looser at times, or more serious at times. But no, I try to maintain. I'm the same person, but it's different and the same at the same time, if that makes sense.
Well, I'm really happy that the timing worked and everything came full circle for you. It sounds like you're doing a fantastic job, and I wish you all the best. And
thank you.
And I'll be watching for CHS track. I've never done that before, but I will. Thank you all for being here with us. Dan, thank you again. And please join me again here at Where Are They Now? Thank you.